Welcome to the LDN radio show, brought to you by the LDN Research Trust. I'm your host, Linda Elsiegood. I have an exciting lineup of guest speakers who are LDN experts in their field. We will be discussing low-dose Naltrexone and its many uses in autoimmune diseases, cancers, etc. You're invited to join us on air, asking your questions by calling in on the local rate phone numbers in the UK and the US, which can be found on ldnradio.org. Thank you for joining us. This show is sponsored by Mark Drugs, who specialise in the custom compounding of medications, assuring that the client gets the proper prescriptions for their unique needs and conditions. They work with practitioners, integrating knowledge and treatment of experts to create comprehensive health plans. Visit markdrugs.com or call Roselle 630-529-3400 or Deerfield 847-419-9898. Hello and welcome, and today our guest is Dr. Tom O'Brien, and he's back by popular demand. There's so many people out there who really want to understand about gluten. Thank you for joining us today, Tom.
Oh, thank you, Linda. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, the question we're always being asked is, why is a gluten-free diet so important? And the next question is, if you believe you should have a gluten-free diet, how do you manage to live with such a restrictive diet, with going out, meeting friends, and not getting bored with giving up the foods that you probably enjoy eating?
Yes, of course. All right.
You'll start it for 10. Off you go.
Yes, okay, here we go. So in terms of the topic of gluten sensitivity, and first, correction, it's not gluten sensitivity, it really is a wheat sensitivity, because there are many components of wheat besides the gluten family of proteins that may be antigenic, and that is, may stimulate an immune response. For example, we know that the gluteomorphins, those components of poorly digested wheat that are called gluteomorphins, they bind to and stimulate the opiate receptors. That's why they're called gluteomorphins. And they are not gluten proteins. They're gluteomorphins. So if we're stuck in thinking only about gluten, we will miss a large portion of the family, about 50%. Of the people that have a sensitivity to components of wheat are not sensitive to gluten. So if you only check gluten proteins for an immune response, you're going to miss 50% of the people that have a problem with wheat. And there are many families of proteins that we have to consider besides the gluten family of proteins. So that's the first thing. And why is it important to do that? So I'm going to explain it in the way that I talk to patients about it. Mrs. Patient, proteins are like a pearl necklace. And hydrochloric acid that's produced in the stomach breaks down, it undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you're holding a string of pearls. And when you're holding that string of pearls, it's the enzymes, the digestive enzymes produced by the small intestines, the microbiota of the small intestines, the pancreas, the gallbladder, the liver. All of these different tissues produce enzymes that act as scissors to snip away at the pearls of the pearl necklace. So you've got this pearl necklace you're holding now, and it snips into 2 pieces, and then each of those pieces is snipped again, so you've got 4 pieces now, and then 8 and 16. that our enzymes snip the pearl necklace smaller and smaller until you're down to the actual individual pearls. Those are called amino acids. And it's the amino acids that can go right through the walls of the intestines to be absorbed into the bloodstream. That, let's see, I'm going to back up and give you one more concept here so that we can understand how these things are absorbed. If you think of a donut, and if you could stretch a donut out completely, just straight down, stretching a donut, and you look down the center of it, that's your GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract. It's one big long tube that goes from the mouth to the other end. And when you swallow food, and if you look down the tube, it's really not in the body, it's still in the tube. So it's the different foods that we eat have to go through the walls of the intestines to get into the bloodstream. And how does that absorption occur? It occurs by the lining of the intestines having a cheesecloth. And that cheesecloth only lets really small molecules get through into the bloodstream. And larger pieces of the pearl necklace can't get through until it's snipped down smaller and smaller and smaller until it's individual amino acids. And those individual pearls, those individual amino acids, can go right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. But once again, larger components cannot get through. That's one of the reasons why our intestines are 20 to 25 feet long and wind around inside our abdomen, is because some foods are more difficult to digest and take longer to break down into small enough pieces to go through the cheesecloth and get into the bloodstream. Prime rib takes a whole lot longer to break down than a banana. And that's why we have such distance in our intestines. Foods have to be broken down small enough to get through. That's another reason why it's so important to chew. And there are many doctors, many of our senior doctors, those have been around for many years, and if you read some of the writings of senior doctors of years past, they always talk about how important it is to chew your food and not swallow your food. It's because the mastication process, the chewing process, begins breaking down the foods. And if you take 2 chews or 3 chews of a piece of a hamburger and then swallow it down, it's much more difficult to digest than if you take 10 chews or 15 chews or whatever the number is. There's that whole discipline of food selections called macrobiotics, where they encourage chewing every mouthful 30 times. I tried that one time, and I recommend my patients do it one time. It's really a nuisance to do it, but count 30 chews with a forkful of rice. And if you count 30 chews, what you notice, besides being bored and wanting to get on with it, the taste is different. All of a sudden, it starts becoming sweeter. And what you're doing is breaking down some of the carbohydrates with the saliva, the enzymes in our saliva. So the concept of chewing is really important to break down your food. But we're not going to go there in detail right now. I talk about that in the all-day seminar in great detail about the entire digestive process to help people get the nutrients out of their foods once they select healthier foods. So the foods have to be broken down small enough to go right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. That's the important bullet point here. That's the first thing to understand. The problem with wheat, and there have been a number of different papers that have shown this. Harvard did one, Hollon, Hollon, at Harvard, and his team. They published a paper that showed they took recently diagnosed celiacs. So those are people who are eating wheat and just been diagnosed, and they've got villus atrophy. They took a group of celiacs who had been diagnosed for 1 to 2 years and had been on a gluten-free diet, and their microvilli had healed, so they were celiacs in remission. They had healed. They took a group of people who had problems with wheat and did not have celiac disease, but they had symptoms, and they were referred to as non-celiac gluten sensitivity people. And it really should have been non-celiac wheat sensitivity, but they called them NCGS, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And then they took people that had no problems with wheat. They looked at all four groups, and what did they find? All four groups, every person, when they eat wheat, every person develops intestinal permeability, excessive intestinal permeability. The slang term is the leaky gut. So they develop excessive or pathogenic intestinal permeability when they're exposed to wheat. Everyone. And what they pointed out was that all humans have a problem with wheat in terms of how your immune system responds and what happens in the intestines when you eat wheat. Now, all people don't suffer when they eat wheat, but all people have that reaction when they eat wheat. If you're a human, and most of the people listening here today are humans, some of you, your wives might not think so. At times you're not human, but you are. And if you're a human, this happens to all of us. Why don't we get sick with that? So the reason that we don't get sick when we eat wheat, most people can't feel that they have a problem going on when they eat wheat, is because wheat is a minor irritant. It's a minor toxin. The body treats it like a toxin, like a parasite, the same way it treats any other parasite. The same immune responses occur, but it's a minor parasite. And that's true for all of us, even if you carry the genes for celiac disease. And there are a number of studies that have looked at the family members of celiac patients who complained about some abdominal complaint, and they checked them. They did not have celiac disease. But 6 years later, 10 years later, they've got celiac disease. So why did that happen? How did that happen? Why didn't they have it when they first had abdominal complaints? It's because of something called loss of oral tolerance, a loss of oral tolerance, that wheat is a minor irritant for us as humans. It causes problems for everybody, but Mrs. Patient, you have an entire new body every 7 years. Every cell in your body regenerates. We used to think the brain and the heart did not regenerate, but we now know they do. You can rebuild healthier brains and healthier hearts and cardiovascular tissue, and we talk about that in the full day event, how to build a healthier brain. But some cells regenerate faster than other cells do. For example, the inside lining of your intestines are the fastest growing cells in the body. Every 3 to 5 days, depending on what study you read, every 3 to 5 days you have a whole new lining to your gut. It's like the skin of a snake. It just gets shed, and you're building new cells constantly. So you eat wheat. It's a minor irritant. It causes some tears in the cheesecloth. That's pathogenic intestinal permeability, but you heal. Fastest growing cells in the body, the inside lining of the gut. So you heal until one day, and you have toast for breakfast, you tear the lining of your gut, but you heal. You have a sandwich for lunch, you tear the lining of your gut, but you heal. You have pasta for dinner, you tear the lining of your gut, but you heal. Croutons on your salad, tear the lining of the gut, but you heal. A cookie, a piece of cake, and the next day you have a bagel, a croissant, a sandwich, lasagna. Day after day after day after day, the average is 132.5 pounds of wheat consumption per person in the U.S. I don't know the numbers in Great Britain, but in the U.S., it's 132.5 pounds per person. Now, I don't eat any, so that means somebody else is eating 265 pounds of wheat every day or every year. So you tear the lining of the gut, you tear the cheesecloth, but it heals. And that goes on day after day after week, and you don't feel anything, you don't have any problems, until one day you cross an imaginary line. And that can be when you're 2 years old, 22 years old, or 72 years old, but you cross the imaginary line, you don't heal anymore. Now the inflammation continues to be produced in higher amounts more pathogenic intestinal permeability, and all the complications that that can cause, which we'll get into a little later, including the development of autoimmune diseases. So it's called loss of oral tolerance. And we talk about that in great detail in the full day course because it takes about 30 minutes, 45 minutes to really talk about it and show the studies and what it means, how it happens, how do you minimize that. But it's a loss of oral tolerance that develops. And when that hits you, whatever age it hits you at, now the wheat that you've been eating every day, not noticing any problems, now you start having problems. And whether you have symptoms or not just depends on how the problem manifests. For example, if you pull at a chain, the chain always breaks at the weakest link, always. It can be at one end, at the middle, the other end. It can be your heart, your brain, your liver, your gut, your kidneys, your muscles, your bones, wherever the weak link is in your chain. So if the weak link in your chain is your bones, and now you've crossed over, you've lost oral tolerance from eating wheat, and now you're getting pathogenic intestinal permeability, and the mechanism, which is called molecular mimicry, which we'll talk about later if there's enough time, if that's manifesting in the weak link of your chain, that's your bones, now you develop osteoporosis because that's the weak link in your chain. Or if the weak link in your chain is your brain, you may develop multiple sclerosis, or you may develop cerebellar ataxia, or you may develop seizures, epilepsy, or you may develop schizophrenia. That there's thousands, literally there's over 20,000 studies in the medical literature on the different manifestations of a problem with wheat sensitivity. It just depends on where the weak link is in your chain. And in the full day course, we talk about what determines where the weak link is. It's your genetics and antecedents. And the antecedents are the way you've lived your life so far. Do you eat tuna fish every week, couple, 3 times a week? You likely have mercury poisoning. That's an antecedent that sets up where the weak link is in your chain. And there are many, many antecedents that determine where the weak link is. But so you cross that line of oral tolerance. Now you have pathogenic intestinal permeability. Now the inflammation from wheat continues, causing more inflammation, more with consumption, more inflammation, more intestinal permeability, more systemic inflammation, pulling on the chain, and wherever the weak link is, you start damaging that tissue. If it's your thyroid, you start damaging your thyroid tissue. And again, and again, and again, until one day you've killed off so many thyroid cells, and we go through all the mechanisms and all the studies of this to show it. You kill off so many thyroid cells, now you begin having thyroid dysfunction. When you begin having thyroid dysfunction, now you've got cold hands and feet. Maybe you wear socks to bed, or your spouse says that your feet are always cold in bed, or you're chilled during the day. No one else is cold but you are. You can't lose weight, even if you don't eat anything for 3 or 4 days. Your metabolism is slowed down so much. You can't get out of bed in the morning. You wish you had 20 more minutes in bed. Hit that snooze a few times in the morning. All of these are signs, and you just feel a little worse, a little worse, a little worse. This goes on for a while, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, until finally it gets so bad because more tissue's being damaged. Now eventually you go to a doctor who says, oh, sounds like you have some thyroid symptoms. Let's take a look here. Oh, you've got autoimmune thyroid disease called Hashimoto's. And then they try to treat your autoimmune thyroid disease. But there are many studies, a number of books that are written on this also, that when you take wheat out of the diet of these Hashimoto's patients that have crossed over with oral tolerance, and now wheat's a problem for them, when you take wheat out of their diet, their antibody loads to their thyroid start to come down. And in many, many cases, they come back down to normal because you're no longer throwing gasoline on the fire, you're no longer pulling on the chain, and so that weak link isn't manifesting so much anymore. And your body always wants to be healthier if it can. You've just been pulling on that chain so hard it's not been possible for it. And so you can arrest, and the literature, the medical literature says, you can arrest the development of autoimmune diseases. And part of the mechanism in doing that is to identify the foods like wheat. Wheat's the most common one that may be the problem. So I've gone through a very, very sophisticated overview here that most doctors have not had the opportunity to read the studies on these things, because you have to read a number of studies to get this big picture overview. And that's what we talk about in detail in the full day course. And so this just makes perfect sense to you when you see the studies in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association and the British Medical Journal, study after study after study. I think now, my full day course, I review 360, maybe 370 different studies, and they're all up on the screen. Here they are, and here's what they say. And when you follow the line of thinking of what these different authors have told us, it begins to make sense. And when it begins to make sense, we start to see how important it is to include these concepts in our overview of our patients. So that's kind of a big picture overview, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Why wheat? So wheat's a problem for everyone, but we don't get symptoms until you lose oral tolerance.
Mm-hmm. So we've got about 5 minutes, and I know that you could speak on this for a long time. But to follow a wheat-free diet, how easy is that to implement?
When a patient is educated on the mechanisms that are causing their fatigue, or the mechanisms causing their loss of brain function when they feel like they've got brain fog and their mother died of Alzheimer's, or the mechanism for why they can't walk up the stairs very well, they're out of breath, when patients understand that these are inflammatory conditions, that it's always inflammation, and the rule of thumb, when you have an inflammatory condition, every disease is an inflammatory disease. At the cellular level, the cell is always on fire, always. I don't know of a disease that's not an inflammatory disease. So once we recognize that, once a patient understands that, without getting all geeky, and having to read these science studies, but once a patient understands this, then it makes perfect sense. Stop throwing gasoline on the fire. So when we understand that we're throwing gasoline on the fire when we eat foods that trigger our immune system to try and protect us, it doesn't matter anymore. I mean, to be fair, it's not easy at times. I travel extensively teaching all over the world. I just came back from Dublin last night. It's not easy when you're traveling in airports, because every facility at airports are a high volume, get them in, get them out, get it to them quick kind of places. The restaurants, the coffee shops, all of the snacks. The vast majority of snacks are wheat-based snacks, the vast majority of them. So if you are traveling and you didn't get a chance to have breakfast before you went to the airport because it's a 6:30 or 7 a.m. flight, you had to be there at 5:30, and check in and go through security lines and all that, so you didn't have a chance to eat breakfast. Now you're through security, your flight's in an hour and 10 minutes, and you're hungry. What are you going to do? Well, what I do in those situations is I'll have a couple of fried eggs, and I'll have some potatoes. White potatoes are not the best thing for you, but they're not going to kill you unless you have a sensitivity to potatoes, but it's safe. Or I'll have a couple of fried eggs to get some protein, and then I'll have a fruit cup. So you can make do. You won't have the comfort of your favorite foods when you're traveling. When you're at home, it's a whole different situation. But when you're traveling, it's harder. It is, but you're not going to starve. And I call it a first world problem. I don't know what to eat. Well, that's a first world problem. Let's teach you. And we, of course, give you many, many recipes. My book is The Autoimmune Fix. And there's an entire chapter of recipes in there. The new book coming out in the fall has, I think it's 20 now, 20 different entries of a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, gluten-free, dairy-free, that your family will love. And there's, I think it's 20 different entries of things that you can make. And once you learn, how to make these things, it's not hard. I mean, it's so simple. Oh, my goodness. I'm going to give you guys one now that's so simple, but it's foreign to most of us. We've not done this before, so you have to buy a few things differently. So you have to learn a few new things. But here's an example. You buy some chia seeds. You buy organic chia seeds. They're high in omega-3s, the good fats for you. And you put a tablespoon in like a little serving cup or a small glass, and you pour coconut milk in there. Now, chia seeds will start to gel when they get wet. They'll start to form a gel and they stick together. So every 2 or 3 minutes, you just have to stir it with a spoon 3 or 4 times so the chia seeds are spreading amongst the coconut milk all the way from the bottom to the top. And after about 5 minutes or 10 minutes of that, of stirring it every couple, 3 minutes, then they start to sit in throughout the coconut milk and they don't settle to the bottom anymore. That means they're starting to gel. They're secreting these lignins that are starting to gel a little bit. And you do it once or twice more, and then within 10 minutes or 15 minutes, the chia seeds are now sitting comfortably throughout the entire coconut milk in the glass. Put it in the refrigerator so it's nice and cold, and then you take some fruit. Like you can take some, I personally like mango when it's available in season. And you just cut up some mango and just kind of crush it a little bit. Make it into a pulp. Or apples, if you like apples, you can put a little honey on it or a couple of raisins in there, mix it together. And then you put it on top of this glass of the coconut milk chia seed, and then it's a dessert. And it's really good. It's unbelievably good, and it's so healthy for you, and it's not rocket science to make it. You just need to buy a bag of chia seeds and some coconut milk, and so you don't need a piece of pie after a nice meal that you make. You can have this, and it's really simple. Kids love it, and you pick fruits that they're going to like or that you like. You can do raspberries or strawberries or whatever you like. Just kind of make it into a pulp and put it on top of there, and every time you spoon in, you get some of the pulped fruit and you get some of the coconut milk chia seed thing. That you don't have to be a Julia Child to eat really well gluten-free. And I also go dairy-free, so gluten-free and dairy-free. It's not difficult.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Tom. It's really interesting, and I think we'll have to do this as a part 2 very soon. This show is sponsored by Mark Drugs, who specialise in the custom compounding of medications, assuring that the client gets the proper prescriptions for their unique needs and conditions. They work with practitioners, integrating knowledge and treatment of experts to create comprehensive health plans. Visit markdrugs.com or call Roselle 630 529 3400 or Deerfield 847 419 9898. Any questions or comments you may have, please email me, Linda, Linda, at ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciated your company. Until next time, stay safe and keep well.